Hi guys, it's Mrs. Nivert. I am back with The Wild Robot. I hope you're enjoying getting to hear read aloud. I'm going to pick up where Mrs. Grant left off yesterday. So chapter 32, The Old Barn. Long ago, Hilltop Farm was a very different place. The original farmers grew vegetable gardens and fruit orchards, and they raised chickens and sheep and goats. The farm had changed a lot since then, but there were still signs of its past. Low stone walls lined some of the fields. A rusty tractor sat in the weeds, and hidden within a densely wooded grove was the old barn. The barn hadn't been used in generations. Over the years, trees had quietly grown up around it and moss had spread across its roof. But the barn was still strong and solid, and Roz wanted to take a look inside. The big barn door screeched along its rails. "Hello?" said the robot, peering into the darkness. "Is anyone here?" Here's a picture of her at the edge of the barn. A mouse squeaked and scurried out of sight, and then Roz had the barn to herself. She stepped through the doorway and switched on her headlights. The vast interior was crisscrossed with thick wooden beams. Stairways and ramps led to the lofts and platforms. Lanterns hung from the hooks on the walls. Old-fashioned farm equipment lay here and there. The barn still had a faint smell of farm animals, even though none had lived there in ages. Peter Brown, I feel like this paragraph right here was a beautiful, beautiful description of the setting for this book. Mrs. Grant just texted me and it came up in the corner of your screen. I don't know if you guys are going to see that or not. A large trunk sat on the work table covered in dust. Roz carefully opened the lid and examined its contents. A collection of farming magazines, a pair of leather gloves, a pencil nub, and then she noticed a small journal. The name Cyrus Sharif was elegantly scrawled across its cover. The pages were filled with his handwritten notes and hand-drawn diagrams about raising livestock and growing crops and building barns, about working the land with the help of strong animals and simple machines. Oh, so I guess you're thinking right now what I'm thinking, which is this was generations and generations ago, right? Because they've come so far that they have robots doing all the work. Cyrus Sharif had also jotted down his thoughts about the long history of farming. He believed that the modern world owed its entire existence to the ancient farms, when early humans first started growing their food. Those farms were small and primitive, but they supported villages, which became towns, which became cities. I still think it was written a long time ago. The writings were so wise and insightful that Roz read the journal from cover to cover. By the end, she almost felt as if she knew Cyrus Sharif, whoever he was. The journal was a treasure, and she tucked it into a pocket of her tool belt for safekeeping. You guys are probably thinking the same thing I'm thinking. The last name is Sharif. It obviously is a descent or an ancestor of Mr. Sharif, who's now her boss. Chapter 33, The Autumn. Autumn colors were sweeping across farm country. The lush greens of summer faded to reds and browns. Crops were harvested, leaves fell away, and the landscape turned stark and gray. On Hilltop Farm, the cows were grazing on what remained of the pasture grass, while the herding machine hovered nearby. The field machine was preparing the fields for winter. The drone circled the farm several times a day, but there was less to report in autumn. Although Jaya and Jad were busy with school, they always made time for Roz. The children never grew tired of listening to the robot's stories, and they never grew tired of sharing their own. The bees and the mice and the deer and the frogs and the raccoons and the squirrels and the snakes were all getting ready for cold weather. So too were the birds. The owls spruced up their nests. The crows stockpiled acorns. The swallows were still swooping over the farmland, but they would soon be leaving for winter. And any day now, other migratory birds would begin passing through on their long journeys to the south. Who's going to be there? Any ideas? You think? I don't know. Chapter 34, The Delighted Geese. A flock of geese had just landed at Hilltop Farm. It was the first flock of the autumn migration. The geese floated on the pond, cleaning their feathers and nibbling on weeds. But they all stopped what they were doing when Roz waved and said hello. The robot never forgot a face, and she was certain she didn't know any of these geese, but they seemed to know her. Before she even introduced herself, the lead goose squawked, "Is your name Roz?" The robot stared at the goose. "Yes, it is." "And you speak the animal language?" The answer was obvious, but Roz politely said, "Yes, I speak the animal language." "Do you by chance have a goose for a son?" "Yes, I do," said Roz excitedly. "His name is Brightbill." At that, a voice blurted out, "The stories are true!" And suddenly the flock was smiling and fluttering over to the robot. When the commotion settled down, the leader explained, "All along our migration, we've heard rumors of a robot who can speak with animals, who had a goose for a son, and who's trapped on a farm. That sounded ridiculous to us, but here you are." The flock was absolutely delighted to meet our robot. They lounged around the pond for a couple of days, chatting with Roz whenever she came by, and then they continued flying south to their wintering grounds. Another flock of geese arrived, and the same thing happened all over again. Roz welcomed them. They were delighted to meet the legendary robot, and then the flock continued south. Then it happened again and again, and before long the coming and going of delighted geese was just another part of the robot's autumn routine. Straggling behind the others as usual was Wingtip's flock. When Roz saw them splashing onto the pond, she felt something like hope that they might have news of her son. Sadly, the geese had no news to report, and the flock took off and left Roz behind, and she began to question whether she'd ever see Brightbill again. We can read chapter 35. Chapter 35, The Memories. Roz still dreamed of escaping, of going home, of reuniting with her son. But her dreams were starting to feel impossible. She was losing hope. Was it time for the robot to accept her new life and forget her old one? Forget. Roz was troubled by that word. You see, her computer brain remembered every detail of her life on the island, and it hurt to think she might never make it back there. However, the robot could always forget. She could erase her old memories. It would be like they never happened. The heaviness she now felt would vanish, but without her memories, who would she be? No, Roz wanted to remember her old life, which was good because someone in her old life was about to reappear. Ooh, I feel like I need to stop. I'll read it just for you. Chapter 36, The Unusual Flock. Another flock of geese was approaching the farm, but this flock was unusual. It wasn't flying south like the others. It was flying north in a perfect V formation, and it was led by a young, graceful goose. The flock flew once around the farm buildings and then delicately touched down in the barnyard. The leader whispered some words to the others, and then he fluttered through the barn door. The cows looked up from their stalls as the goose perched himself on a railing near the middle of the barn. Then the goose cleared his throat, shook out his tail feathers, and announced to the herd, "I am looking for a robot named Roz. My name is Brightbill. I am her son." I'm going to stop right there, you guys. That's the end of chapter 36. So tune in. I think Mrs. Gladstone will be reading the next installment.